Good Shabbos. In the summer of 1985-86, I was traveling through the states of Utah and Idaho, visiting Jews who were not really connected to any Jewish communities. It was before there were permanent Shabbat Shalom in these states. And we visited an army base and visited with a Jewish couple. And whilst we're sitting there, we asked him, would you like us to check the mezuzah? He says, sure. I go to his door, I take off the mezuzah from the door, and that is the mezuzah case, and I look inside, there's nothing in there. I say, there's nothing inside. He says, the instructions, I threw it out. This week we read about the mitzvah of mezuzah. It's the second portion of Shema, which the second time the Torah tells us after the first portion of Shema. Last week, again, the Torah tells us about the mitzvah of the mezuzah. However, this time the Torah adds a point. As the Torah, which is one of the major codifiers in halacha, tells us that the mitzvah of mezuzah, the reward for the mitzvah of mezuzah, is long life. Long life is the reward. And the Torah, then the Torah says something interesting. He goes beyond that. He says, greater than that, greater than the long life, is the fact that the mezuzah guards your home, protects your home. And the commentaries ask, well, what could be greater than long life? Why is protecting your home greater than long life? So let me tell you a story that maybe explains it. A story that happened last couple of years. This is in China, in Zhengdu. There's a shliach called Dubby Hennig. And when Corona happened and there was major lockdowns, he moved with his family to Israel for many weeks, staying with family. Until he finally came back. When he came back, they didn't allow him into his home initially, the authorities, because they said that all the area that he lived with, there was a lot of expats, thieves went through there and stole a lot of stuff, and they want to check out the situation and get fingerprints and so on and so forth. Anyway, finally, they let him into his home, and nothing was touched. It was left as is. 2 weeks later, he gets a call from the chief of police, who tells him, you have to come over. So he comes over. He says, listen, we caught the thieves. And the first thing we asked him is, why didn't you steal from the rabbi's home, everyone else's home? So he says, look, this is a place with great alarm systems. So we had to neutralize them. We were able to neutralize the alarm systems of all the other homes. But the alarm system on this rabbi's home, we couldn't neutralize. So we didn't go in. What alarm system was talking about? The mezuzah. So the chief of police asked the rabbi, tell me, where did you get the system that is so amazing they couldn't neutralize it? It must be a technology from Israel. How right he was. It was a technology from Israel. But this is how the Bet Yosef explains the Torah. He says as follows. When it comes to long life, you can't directly say that the reason you have long life is because of the mezuzah. We say we believe it, but you can't show it. It's not revealed. Whereas if every home in the neighborhood is stolen from, except for the rabbi's home, who has the mezuzah, that tells you that there's a distinction between the rabbi's home that has a better alarm system, and that alarm system is the mezuzah. So that's the Bet Yosef's explanation to it. Now, so how do we view mezuzah? Mezuzah we know is a mitzvah, and we also know that mezuzah is a concept where Hashem protects our home, as we just said. The Talmud tells us that there was a Artavan, was a minister of some sort. He sent Rabbeinu HaKadosh, the one who wrote the Mishnah, he sent him a very precious gem. And he says, I want you to send me something back that's as priceless as this. And Rabbeinu HaKadosh sent him a mezuzah. So he says, wait, you're sending me a parchment? So he says, you sent me something that I have to guard. I sent you something that guards you, that protects you. So we see this idea that mezuzah as a protection is central to the idea of mezuzah. As a matter of fact, the Bach, Beis Chodosh, who's also a commentary on the Torah, he explains it as follows. He says, most mitzvahs have reward, but the reward of the mitzvah is not the mitzvah itself. In other words, the mitzvah is a mitzvah. We do it because God told us. By the way, you also get reward for it, for doing the mitzvah. The protection of the mezuzah, however, is what the mezuzah is about. What is the mitzvah of mezuzah? To protect the Jewish home. That's the definition of the mitzvah. So that's what the Torah means when he says it's greater than that. The long life, that's the reward. But the protection of the home, that is the definition of what mezuzah represents. And that's what's so important about mezuzah. Let me share with you and conclude with an amazing story. Rabbi David Grossman, is Rabbi Migdal Ayman. Had a daughter who got these terrible pus and issues with her eye. And they were scared she might even lose her eye. And they went to doctors in Israel and no one knew what to do. So they were told they should go to a doctor in New Jersey. So they took a flight. He went to New Jersey and he went to the doctor. He had an appointment at 8 o'clock in the morning. He arrives at 6 a.m. He goes to the doctor at 8 in the morning to look at her eye. The doctor looks at the eye. He looks at all the tests. He says, look, I'll come back to you. It's a complicated case. I'll come back to you in a few days. You come back for a visit. The daughter says, look, we're in New York now. Let's go to see the Rebbe. So they came, this 770, the Rebbe Shul, and they arrived just before the Rebbe arrived. So they stood in a row, kind of in a pathway between where the Rebbe walked up out of his car to go into the shul. As the Rebbe is going down the path, Rabbi Grossman did the chutzpah, standing in front of the Rebbe, and he says, Rebbe, here's my daughter, pointing to her where she's standing there on the side. I've written to you about her eye, and we come to see a doctor. Can I have a bracha? The Rebbe looked intently on her, and then turned to him and says, immediately you should check all the mezuzahs for her, and you'll raise it to Torah, that she'll have Torah chuppah, and you'll have much nachas from her. Okay. Immediately calls Israel, tells his wife that get someone to check all the mezuzahs, and included in checking the mezuzahs at home, they checked the room where she stayed at a dormitory in Tzvat, in school in Tzvat. They checked it there as well, and it came back that the mezuzah in Tzvat was missing the word einecha, your eyes. So the word in the eyes was missing. So they fixed it, of course, right away. They fixed the mezuzah. And 12 hours later, all the swelling went down. They went to see the doctor, and the doctor was amazed. Can't believe it's the same girl. How did this happen? So he told him the story. Anyway, 17 years later, Rabbi Grossman was in Teaneck, New Jersey, and he sees this guy. He's sitting and davening, with talis and tefillin, and he turns and he looks up and he sees him, and he says, comes up to him and he embraces him. He says, because of you, I've come back to Torah. I saw how true Torah is. And what happened with the mezuzah, the Rebbe's bracha, I have taken on a way of Torah. This doctor from New Jersey has come back to Torah and Judaism. So as we read the Parsha, we read the second portion of Shema, we're coming to the month of Elul very soon. We're approaching Rosh Hashanah. We have to make our mitzvahs better. Make sure you have kosher mezuzahs. Make sure you have mezuzahs in every door that needs a mezuzah, which is most doors in their home, most doorways, most doors. You can call us to make sure that you have the protection that a mezuzah represents. Good Shabbos.